Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Following on from last week's tribute to Much Ado About Nothing, this week I'm venturing into the world of Hamlet. Now fear not, this hasn't turned into a revision group for English Literature A-level students or a podcast about Shakespeare. We're staying very firmly in the world of psychodynamics. Freud himself had a huge respect for Shakespeare, often using many of the lines from his plays to explain complicated theories that he was developing about the human psyche. And the play Hamlet is a theatrical representation of the Oedipus complex in action. But that's not what we're exploring today. Today we're looking at the often slightly misquoted line, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark." Not only is it often misquoted, it's also not Hamlet who says this, it's Marcellus, as he and Horatio debate whether to follow Hamlet and the ghost into the night. Whilst many people look at this from the point of view that this alludes to corruption in society, which it does, I've decided to tie this into my discussions on narcissism. It also follows on neatly from the episode about flying monkeys. Remember, that's where we look about people who do the narcissist bidding. We're now moving on to why we follow people in situations that might not be good for us. And in having a closer look at this dynamic, what can we see here? Well, for a start, narcissism abounds in Hamlet. Hamlet is quite clearly a narcissist. He's self-absorbed. He's obsessed not only with his father's death, but also with his mother's remarriage and his hatred for his uncle Claudius. He's hypersensitive. He constantly laments. And yet he's also charismatic and a manipulator. So we've got some pretty universal narcissistic traits here. We also have Claudius, his uncle, displaying some pretty narcissistic behaviour. He's greedy, corrupt, manipulative. He doesn't care who he hurts when he takes what he wants. So one of the questions that comes up for me here is, why do we sometimes follow something or someone that we know deep within ourselves isn't right? We have that physical reaction and response to it. We might not know straight away that somebody is displaying narcissistic behaviour, but we know that something just feels off. One of the big reasons for this is anxiety. And we live in an anxiety-inducing world. Just think about all the different pieces of information that fly around us, all the messages, all the, well, you should do this and you should do that and you should do anything. Just open Instagram with all the adverts about what you should and shouldn't be doing, and there's huge amounts of anxiety that pop up for anyone. Freud describes anxiety as a morbid state of mind. And what we will do is we will do absolutely anything we can to defend ourselves against this. We don't want to feel anxious. So when we feel anxious, what do we do as a means of protecting ourselves? Well, I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that out pop the defence mechanisms. A pretty obvious one that we've got here is denial. So we can see that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, but we're going to try to pretend it's not there. We have these uneasy feelings, but we are going to shove them away and push them right down into our unconscious. Perhaps we don't want to see someone in that light. Maybe we've built up an idea of what this person is like or this situation is like in our mind, and we want to see the good in people, so we're just not going to see the bad. What's happening here is we're actually going into a bit of splitting, where we decide something is either all good or all bad because we can't cope with the shades of grey in between. We've got displacement. So we move our difficult feelings about a person or a situation onto another. If we're going into Denmark, to use this as an example, but we don't want to see that something's rotten there, we're going to displace it somewhere else. We're going to decide that something else is rotten. Hamlet gives us an incredible example of this. When we look at the way he transfers his anger at his mother's quick remarriage to his uncle onto Ophelia. So Ophelia he was once in love with. He returns to Denmark. He's discovered that his mother has quickly married his uncle. He then discards Ophelia. He pushes all his negative feelings about women onto Ophelia. So that's a really good example of displacement, because actually it's not her fault at all that his mother has remarried his uncle. We've then got intellectualisation. We can find intellectual reasons as to why something is okay. So we can tell ourselves, we can find examples that actually this is okay because of X, Y or Z. And that's how we defend ourselves that something isn't. It isn't right for us. Closely linked to this, we've got rationalisation. This is where we justify it to ourselves. We're giving ourselves reasons as to why it's okay to follow the narcissist, as to why it's okay to maintain this status quo. A new one for us today, we've got moralisation. Now this is where we seek a sense of duty to do something, even if others don't agree. This can really easily be played on by the narcissist. They can manipulate someone into doing something because they make it seem like they should. We can see a bit of guilt playing out here too. The narcissist can make somebody feel guilty for not doing something, which then leads us to invoke moralisation. We're doing this for the right reasons. We've also got reversal into the opposite. This is where we really don't want to see what's going on. So we're going to convince ourselves that it's actually something else. In our example that we're using today, something is actually very good in the state of Denmark. And that gets rid of all the anxiety that we're feeling that something's rotten in the state of Denmark. What are we going to do about this? Now, this is where practice comes in. Whenever you have that almost physical reaction to something being not quite right, stop. Assess where you are in this situation. We often think we don't have a choice, but we always have a choice. Even if neither option is perfect, we've always got a choice. Take a step back and just have a think about what might be going on. Maybe talk to someone neutral if necessary, somebody who's not involved in the situation. And just because something is rotten in the state of Denmark doesn't mean that we need to be adding to it. We have the power to stop and step away. We very often follow the narcissist in maintaining the state of Denmark as is because it's safe. It's easy. Our brains absolutely love that security. Remember, our brain's job is to keep us alive. So if we've always been following the narcissist in keeping the status quo, then our brain is more than happy to keep that going. It's a common human behaviour, but it's also one that can lead us to feeling quite uncomfortable. We can also feel guilty because we've added to this. We've wanted to feel safe and that we belong in Denmark because it feels safer inside than out. But how true is that really? Hamlet's Denmark doesn't really seem to be a great location to me. My invitation to you this week is to try and be one step ahead of the game. Where have you been adding to Denmark's rotten state, either consciously or unconsciously? How have you been drawn to Denmark, which I'm sure, by the way, is a really lovely place, just maybe not in Shakespeare's view? And as always, give yourself some grace here. It can be tough to realise that we've been caught up in a narcissist world, but we don't have to stay there. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.